What's the disabled tax?
Have you met the new man?
Briefly.
And
Sleep it up.
I would like to tap into that. Thank you.
SDI out, HDMI out. You just don't need to go XLR coming.
Yes.
And the problem with that is it's attenuation because you're going high and low impedance.
Okay, I see.
Hurts somebody.
JD.
how are you?
Hi, I'm Judge Griffin. Where's your county? Hi, it's a real pleasure. Hi, Mary. Thank you. Oh, hi, and you're. Oh, all right. What do you want?
I'll put taking off and introduce all of them. Rachel's a wonderful dear friend of mine. Who's she's also part of the Comic Methodist Church. This is Gail. Well, I'll let you all introduce.
I work with Dave. It's over there. You guys don't okay. So that's gonna be, big order. You can see my yeah. I mean, like, visual verification. Right.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the second day of the second annual Opioid Symposium here at Concord. We really appreciate your attendance. Just a couple housekeeping notes. I do apologize about the floor. We've had some humidity issues, so just be mindful of where you step. We wouldn't want anybody to trip, okay? Also, there's sign-in sheets for social work continuing education credits at the table over there, so make sure you make yourself available to those, or make them available to you, I should say, if you need them. It's really a great honor to have a lot of the individuals that we have up here today. Some I'm very happy to call close friends, and hopefully, as the day progresses, I can say that about more of them. So we're all joined here to talk about some really important issues facing West Virginia, and we do need to thank the West Virginians for affordable health care for their co-sponsorship of the event this morning. Thank you very much. And Inside Appalachia, WVPBS, Jessica Lilly, and the crew, wherever you are, I see you back there. Thank you so much for joining us today. So that's all I'm going to say, because you're much more interested in what these folks have to say. So have a great day, and if you need anything, please look for me or anybody at this table over here, and we'll be more than happy to help you out, okay? Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice. I hope that you stay active this morning in this conversation, especially in the second hour. The first hour, we're going to talk a little bit on stage. Panelists will have the panelists talk, but definitely the second hour. Just want to make sure you're awake. And I don't push this thing off the stage. Thank you for joining us for the 2018 Policy Roundtable Series, Providing Hope to West Virginia's Kids. Today's event is sponsored by West Virginians for Affordable Health Care and Concord University's Department of Social Work and Sociology. I'm Jessica Lilly, host of Inside Appalachia and Folk Life Director with West Virginia Public Broadcasting's radio show and podcast, Inside Appalachia. If you have your phones out, I'll give you a few minutes. You can go ahead and subscribe to the Inside Appalachia podcast. It's okay, go ahead, take your time. You can do that on iTunes, Downcast, or on our website, wvpublic.org, wherever you get your podcasts. Shameless plug. But just a minute or two, then I'll ask that you put your phones away. So I just botched that joke. I set it up really nice, and then I just botched it. So anyway, so I'll be helping with the discussion today by asking a few questions during today's roundtable. For transparency's sake, I should be clear that West Virginia Public Broadcasting does not advocate any particular policies or change in policies, but by providing a moderator, myself, WVPB hopes to facilitate discussion around this very important topic. So before we begin, I want to share a little background about why we're holding this roundtable, one of 4 around the state. And I want to start by recognizing Concord University and Scott Ingram in particular in this roundtable discussion here at Concord. Scott Ingram and the Master of Social Work Department is familiar with the challenges because it serves as part of the solutions to the drug epidemic. Dr. Ingram, right there. He wanted to talk about solutions a couple years ago, so we hosted a discussion a couple years ago. And I can remember he told me that he intended on hosting an event like this here at Concord until the problem is solved every year. So we scheduled the second event for March. Let's go ahead and do it in March. Make sure the snow's gone. It's not going to snow again. Those of you who were involved in that, you might remember one day it was supposed to snow in March, so we had to cancel that event. And we hoped to reschedule it and thought about rescheduling it, and then I just kind of said, well, maybe it'll just go, we'll just, try to schedule one for 2019, but nope. Dr. Ingram refused and persevered, and he did not want to let this year slip by. I think it goes to show his dedication to the community and his work, but he didn't want to let this year go by without an event, so I want to recognize his efforts and the work of Concord University's Master of Social Work Department. I think that kind of determination that you all have is what it will take to combat this issue for not giving up, so I appreciate that. Sure. The drug epidemic's most adversely affected casualties are also the youngest. In February of this year, West Virginia Department of Health and Human Services Cabinet Secretary Bill Crouch told legislators that West Virginia has a child welfare crisis. According to DHHR, West Virginia is the number one state in the country for children removed from the homes. Around 85% of these CPS cases involved drugs. There has been a 113% increase of adoptions in our state since 2005, and over 6,600 children in foster care. Like other states grappling with the effects of this epidemic, West Virginia is literally running out of places to keep its children. I've heard stories, as all of you have, I'm sure, about children sleeping on the floors of the DHHR office and so on. Many stakeholders from the system that serve children, healthcare, child welfare, public education, and foster kinship care have been asking some of the same fundamental questions over the past few years. How do we keep these children safe? How do we keep them healthy? And how on earth do we give them hope? Today, we hope to get to the root of the challenges that face these kids and families, and hope, with your help, to discuss some potential solutions to giving them back their childhoods, and changing the trajectories of their lives. We are so grateful to have all of you who have joined us today in the audience, as well as our panelists and experts who have joined us from around the state. Today's conversation, I hope, will be open and honest dialogue, even though I've been reading from a script for a little while. Are you still with me? Okay, good deal. I think this is going to be a good day. Today's conversation, we hope to be an open and honest dialogue about the generations of traumatized children, the long-term implications of childhood maltreatment, the challenges our systems face to responding to the kids' unmet healthcare needs, and solutions. Most importantly, solutions to alleviate these challenges. Okay, so we have a lot of ground to cover this morning, so we should begin with an overview for today's discussion. For the next hour or so, our panelists will engage in a conversation where we plan to delve into these issues with the end goal of leaving today with meaningful solutions. Panelists, this may mean that I have to cut you off a few times. I'm gentle, I'm nice, it's okay. To get back to the task at hand. Sorry about that. I'll try not to do it that often. I know some of you won't get too windy, right? That's okay. I also want to thank you in the audience for coming today. You know, sometimes the most important thing we can do, especially for these kids, I think, is show up. So thank you. If you have questions during this discussion during the first hour, and we hope that you have questions, please be sure to write them down on the index cards that you should have on your tables there. Someone will walk around to collect them throughout this hour. We're going to take a break for about 20 minutes after the first hour. And at that time, you're all welcome to grab refreshments, network, check your phones, make sure that subscription to Inside Appalachia works. And then join us back for the second half of this event. You'll also have an opportunity to ask your questions directly during the second segment of the program. Okay, so to begin, we really are beginning now. I'd like to have all of our panelists introduce themselves. If you could, we'll start down here on the end. Let us know your name, title, your organization, and I'd like for you to share one of your passions when it comes to fighting this epidemic. So let's start with Ms. Woodard.
On the spot, I'm the first one. I'm Shiloh Woodard. I'm the director of Mercer County's Child Advocacy Center, Child Protect of Mercer County. One of my passions is the Child Advocacy Center movement in West Virginia. For me, I've been involved with it for 12 years, and just to see the growth of our network across the state. And knowing that we are trying to reach our goal of ensuring that every child in West Virginia has access to a fully accredited child advocacy center within 1 hour of where they live.
My name is Reverend David Johnston. I'm the pastor of Concord United Methodist Church here in Athens, West Virginia. I'm also a foster parent and a board member of Child Protect. And one of my passions around this is care of children. My wife and I are both foster parents.
I didn't knock anything over, that's really nice. My name is Emily Reel, I'm the Clinical Director of Residential Substance Use Disorder Services at FMRS. My passion is doing everything that I can to provide adequate evidence-based treatment for the adults who suffer from a substance use disorder and for growing staff who are well equipped to provide that treatment.
My name is Larry Rhodes. I'm a pediatric cardiologist at WVU School of Medicine. I'm the director of rural programs for the Health Sciences Center in Morgantown. My passion is to instill in young children the knowledge that they do have a future and something to live for. And I think that'll go a long way in preventing them participating in some of these activities.
My name is Mike Stewart. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of West Virginia. This is a very passionate subject for me. And so I want to thank Concord University and Scott Ingram for putting this together. I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm in the law enforcement business. Everybody knows I'm in the law enforcement business. You probably read those headlines, and we're doing our best to lock up those Detroit drug dealers as long as we possibly can. But my passion and the reason we do this are for these children. And the number one subject that I get letters from, it's not about public corruption. I've done a little bit of work in that area, some of you know. It's not about the opiate crisis and drugs. It's about children. It's about CPS and the crisis we have in the CPS system right now. This is a real passion for all of us up here, I'm sure. We're going to solve this problem, but it starts in meetings like this.
I'm Judge Mary Ellen Griffith. I'm the family court judge for Mercer and McDowell County. And my passion is keeping children safe in their family.
Good morning. My name is Debbie Davis. I'm founder and director of One Voice. I am most passionate, I think, about feeding children. We currently have a Food for Angels program that we're feeding over 1,000 students in Wyoming County and Raleigh County. But I'm passionate truly from the continuum of care, from prevention to aftercare, and One Voice operates in all of those areas.
Good morning, my name is Greg Puckett. I come to you with a couple of hats on today. I'm the Executive Director of Community Connections, which is the Family Resource Network for Mercer County. We are also the Prevention Lead Organization for the entire southern 11 counties in the state of West Virginia, and we're very committed to making sure that we're out there doing as much prevention activities as possible. I'm also County Commissioner here in Mercer County, so we have to look at things in a very holistic way, everything from the prevention services, early intervention, treatment, recovery. And of course, we're also looking at different budgets and also different ways to get people to access to additional treatment, medicated assisted treatment options, all of those things. I would like to say that I'm probably on both hats. My most passionate thing is to create advocacy and change in all, and not just looking at one particular sector or individual. I think it is very important that we are all change agents and we all have a voice. We need to use that voice in every way possible.
Good morning. My name is Robin Pruitt, and I'm a social worker at Welch Community Hospital in McDowell County. And my passion is having the opportunity to sit at the tables to bring change in healthcare to McDowell County. You know, McDowell County is number 1 in everything bad and number 10 in everything good. And I want to see opportunity in McDowell County for improvement in health, children, families, substance abuse disorder. We're facing a plethora of problems in McDowell County because of the opioid crisis. And I am passionate about being at the table to ensure that my people in McDowell County have opportunity for treatment, increase the opportunity for treatment and bed availability, increase mental health services, and all of those things that contribute to what brings us to the table today. So that's my passion. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I thank Concord College for University. It was Concord College when I went to school here. But anyway, Concord University, I appreciate the opportunity to be at the table and to have this discussion.
I am Kristen Cook. I'm the prosecuting attorney of Summers County. My organization is prosecuting attorney of Summers County. I'm the only attorney in Summers County Prosecutor's Office. So I literally am all Summers County prosecuting attorney. My passion is all things because I handle all cases. With that said, of course, my main focus and my main goals, and any folks that work with me know that it comes down to the kids, protecting the kids, being there for the kids, and trying to rebuild those families. Being a community leader, being there for the organizations I work with, like the CAC, CPS, law enforcement, all those different folks. Getting out into the community, letting those kids know that there are people in the community they can trust, that they can turn to, and that we can help them.
My name is Patty Grady, and I work at the Summers County Child Advocacy Center. I am a therapist. I am certified in trauma-focused CBT and play therapy, and the reason I bring that up is because my passion is, right now I'm supervising 5 therapists that are going to be focused on child and family issues, and my passion at this point in my career is to get highly trained, qualified therapists to change these children and families' trajectories that they can find they're happy and heal. So right now, that is my passion. Thank you.
Good morning. Are y'all awake? My name's Stephen Baldwin. I'm a pastor in Greenbrier County. I also serve in the West Virginia State Senate. My passions are chocolate chip cookies. All right, wait. I'm just seeing if you're awake. And hope. You know, really, I think this comes down to a sense or a lack thereof of hope. So that's my passion in terms of the 2 hats I'm wearing here today: ministry and public policy. How do we provide hope to find solutions moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. As you heard, lots of different perspectives and ground zero understanding. So let's jump right into the first question. And this question is for all of the panelists, and we will start, since we started down here, Shiloh, we'll start down here for the first question. How's that, okay? So West Virginia has been referred to as ground, I'm gonna wheel this off the stage. That'll wake you up, sorry. West Virginia has been referred to as ground zero for the opioid crisis, but we know that substance use disorder has a much longer history in West Virginia. The current efforts to address the opioid crisis will only be as effective as our ability to provide treatment that acknowledges the roots of addiction. For those who have worked in your respective fields for many years, what changes have you seen that have led us to where we are now? And for all the panelists, tell us what we can do as either a state or community to address the roots of addiction in West Virginia. So again, it's the roots of addiction in West Virginia. How did we get here? How do we move forward? You're up.
All right, I'll go first. Well, it's an interesting question for me because I'm new to the legislature. I just began serving in 2016, so it's difficult for me to talk about the legislative approach in the past. I will share with you one story in terms of how I see this changing. I began serving in 2016 in the legislature, and I came there bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to see what we could do to help positively affect the drug crisis. And so I served on that particular subcommittee at the time, which was then formed into a permanent committee. And I was curious to see what sort of bills were available. Most of them had to do with law enforcement. Law enforcement is obviously a huge piece of the puzzle, but it cannot be the only piece of the puzzle. So I introduced a bill that would limit opioid prescriptions. Other states were doing this, they were seeing positive effects. So we had experts come before us and say, this is a positive way to go, West Virginia ought to try this. I introduced that as the first bill that I've ever introduced, and it went absolutely nowhere. Nobody was interested in it. I talked to the health chair, I talked to leadership, nobody was interested in pushing it forward. Fast forward to 2017, and it came forward as a bill from leadership. So, my point here is it takes some time. I think folks in Charleston aren't always sure exactly what we need to do to move forward, but with a little time, they see what can work.
I believe Ground Zero has always existed. Addiction has been part of our culture dating back to biblical days. And what I would say would assist at this point or help is one, addiction is a disease, just like diabetes, just like heart disease. People are still struggling with the stigmas of obtaining mental health treatment, of reaching out for services, the fears, the myths of, say, CPS, that they're in the business of taking the kids away. No, they're in the business of reunifying families and doing some really super things with foster to adopt. So looking at Ground Zero, it's got to continue to be a entire culture change, that we can be accepting, to opening doors to people who have had some difficult times and had some felony offenses. Creating a safety net in the community. My philosophy is adopt one family. If everybody in Summers County adopted one family that was struggling with addiction or poverty, how would that change the outlook of Summers County? And I'm not saying financially, I'm saying just that, let's fix that porch. Let's get a group of people together and put in that new toilet. I think we're getting there. Day report, I've seen a good shift. It's not, they are coming and assisting so many community organizations, and you're seeing people get that happy pay. And also, we are beginning to see Celebrate Recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, very limited. And it's very difficult with the state of the transportation crisis. So I guess my basic thing is the shift, the cultural shift, the mind shift, that we need to treat addictions, we need to research addictions, and we need to not necessarily, we need to take that stigma away and help uplift people in our area. Thank you.
I agree with Patty in many ways, but I'm also going to be the Debbie Downer probably of the group. In my business, it just seems generation after generation after generation. I prosecute parents, I then prosecute their children, and I prosecute their children. And I guess what I've seen a lot of is kids are product of their environments. They pick up on what their parents do, what their peers do, all of those different things. I think we're heading in the right direction a lot with community corrections programs, with substance abuse counseling programs, those type of things. But as a prosecutor, you weigh a lot of things, and a lot of your community believes that we incarcerate and that we punish for things that are done. And what I notice in my field is that it's not necessarily all about punishment or incarceration. First and foremost, it's about the best interest of children. And when you're sitting there with a kid, and a child's crying to you saying, but I want my mom, but I want my dad, and I want my family. And I've got an entire community saying, but incarcerate them because they are no good. I can only be as effective as what I need for that child versus what I need for that community. So I think everybody's going in the right direction, but it's also about changing community perceptions and having more of that open heart and that hope that people can become better people, that can overcome their addictions, those type of things. And with kids, letting kids know that there are people out there that can help them, that can help deal with that, and also respecting the fact that those are their parents. We don't necessarily have to cut off their parents and say no more, never again. Then on the flip side of that, I have some parents that I wish we could absolutely sterilize and stop them from producing child after child after child after child, born drug addicted, constant medical needs, those type of things, which, I mean, I guess that's for Senator Baldwin at a later date. But, you know, there's many things that I think we are shifting in the right direction, but we're also trying to overcome a culture that has been here for forever, as Patty was saying. I mean, this is something that I often describe it as we can look around a room full of kids and we notice the kids that are pounding Mountain Dew and eating Little Debbie cakes, and we're like, wow, that's bad parenting decisions. But then we also look at some of these kids who can take a bag of M&Ms and count out which pills are for who and describe to you how to inject needles into their arms and those type of things. So I think for all the panelists up here, it's weighing almost what's the lesser of two evils and trying to get more to the root of that.
One thing, if I could interject really quickly, that I've heard you two mention is the culture. And as we talk about, and I just wanted to break really quickly and mention to the panelists, as you think about the root, I wonder if we can dig into what is it about the culture that you find here that makes it ground zero, that within West Virginia and Appalachia, and yes, you have drug addiction everywhere, yes, you have those from those who suffer from substance use disorder. But what is it about our culture that makes us ground zero? What is it that's unique here? What is the root of it on that type of level? As we think about it, I wonder if we can dig into that, or if any of the panelists have thoughts about that. We can keep moving down.
Just to set a backdrop, I think West Virginia was sort of set up or targeted, if you will. You know, the history of coal mining and these timbering and labor-intensive jobs, if we know the history of all of this, then years ago, coal camp physicians would prescribe pain medications and treatments to keep coal miners and timbers in these heavy labor jobs. They would keep these folks moving, keep these employees moving. And Big Pharma came along and they targeted poor, rural, labor-intensive areas. And, you know, people that were depressed and despondent. And, you know, Big Pharma takes a big responsibility in this, I do believe. They were targeted. They had the FDA to put these pills out as safe. These pills that were safe, OxyContins and the oxycodones and the hydrocodones. They're safe. They're good for people. They treat pain. And to keep coal miners and keep timbers and all of their laborers working in West Virginia, they were marketing this as a safe pill. Okay, then as a result of that, they targeted Joint Commission, who then says, we're gonna put the fifth vital sign as pain, which put pressure on physicians to treat pain with a safe pill, okay? So I think there's a lot of responsibility here, and that's, to me, I am thinking about this when I received the question, I thought, you know, we were sort of set up for ground zero, I do believe, in West Virginia. Rural, poor counties, physicians were targeted, there were perks and rewards for physicians who prescribed, and then consequently, this is where we are. We have people suffering, dying, and very little resources to rescue them. I think what needs to happen, of course, we're moving in the right direction in terms of health. Physicians are now, you know, there's a database. You can access a database if you work in healthcare to see, you know, the medications that people are getting. You know, there's a 3-day limit on prescribing pain medications now, controlled substance. So, you know, public education, you know, expanding medication-assisted treatment and SUD treatment, substance use disorder treatment, I think is where we are. We have to look at this. Increasing mental health availability. We know that mental health goes hand in hand with addiction. So there are many things that we need to look at, addressing the job situation. Increasing skills training. These kinds of things is what we need to be looking at. But in terms of ground zero, I sort of believe that West Virginia was targeted and sort of set up because 83% of their jobs in McDowell County are coal mine related. in West Virginia. So we have to look now, we're on the backside of this trying to figure out where do we go from here. This is a big problem, and where do we go from here? So we need to look at screenings and assessments and how do we screen people, how do we capture. And at the middle and high school levels, we need to begin to have the conversations around addiction with these children, helping them to understand what in the world's going on, make sense of the chaos going on in their families. We need to have, I think that we need to incorporate addictions education into the curriculum at the middle and high school levels. A lot of things that need to be done, and it's going to take all of us.
All right, we're moving along, and we've done pretty well with folks keeping it to about 2 or 3 minutes. Up next, Greg Puckett.
So far, she's looked at me twice. She mentioned me being windy, and now she's giving me a time limit. So I think there's a couple of things we'd like to address on this, and you're going to hear the statistics all the way around. First thing is addressing the culture. I think from the standpoint of who West Virginia is, being the only state that is encompassed in the Appalachian Territory, we are predetermined as we are a hardworking society. We are a very giving culture. We are a loving culture. And those are things that are certainly an asset. But unfortunately, they can also be a detriment, because when we're trying to help our fellow man and there's an addiction problem within that, we freely give the pills over to somebody else to try to help them on a regular basis. I've heard the stories, countless stories about being in the ERs and saying, well, I've got a couple of Lortabs here, I've got a couple of OxyCondoms, I know you're hurting right now just sitting here. We've seen overdoses happen in the emergency room because of the caring culture. We hear the stories all the time. So when I think about Appalachia, one of the other things I think about in that culture is that, we are losing who we are in terms of our arts and culture. I mean, people that are handing down generations of, understanding how to play the banjo, how to play the violin, basic arts and culture and things that made us who we are, now we are losing that because that is not transcending down to the next generation. It's becoming lost. So I think in terms of a cultural thing, it's a cultural failing on our part. So the opioid addiction is actually changing who we are, not just about who we seem to be. The other thing is in the continuum of care, everything from prevention, treatment, early intervention, treatment, and recovery, we've got to do a better job at getting everybody to work together. And I think that's something that we have failed at over the last few years. You got to remember that we're only in this crisis for the last 20 years. This started in 1998 with Purdue Pharma throwing OxyContin at us left and right. In Mercer County alone, just in 2005 to 2017, we've had 27 million pills thrown at us in a county of less than 60,000. So you got to understand that, yeah, it's a marketing model. I mean, Senator Manchin has said it best. It's not a pain model. This is a sales model. We've seen this over and over, so we've got to address that. Last thing I want to mention, and I'm sure we'll talk about other things, we've seen the administrations past. Clinton, Bush, we had a 60% reduction since that 1998 timeline on prevention-based funding. So it's no wonder where we are. We haven't had a chance to educate our young people to be brought up into a system that understands the process of addiction. So now, all of a sudden, of the last administration and this one, we're starting to see that money flow. Things are coming in, we're having additional symposiums, education, we're getting into the school system, into elementary school, we're doing a lot of really good things. But I think as we move forward, we need to make sure that West Virginia gets its fair share. One of the things I've advocated for, when they give that first $500 million, West Virginia got 1%. That's not enough. In a society that's addicted to a particular substance, you've got to advocate for more. We're starting to see that now thanks to our legislature, but we still need to do more. And I'm sure we'll address this as we go on. Thank you.
Well, I'm an encourager by nature, so first of all, let me speak to, in 2005 when I began One Voice, there were no treatment centers, there were no discussions about substance use, there were no roundtables, and there certainly weren't universities like Concord today that is housing this wonderful, wonderful event. I've seen a lot of wonderful change because in 2005, I was a high school teacher and we were burying our high school students. And the students would say, we have no place to go, and we have no one to talk to. It's time to change that. I think now we need to meet that need wherever we are. Everybody looks and everybody can sit in this panel and they can say, do all these wonderful things. And this is the statistic man. He can ask him. He can tell you anything. That you're sitting at a table and you need to look at your back porch and you need to see and say and do. And that's what I find we're not doing. Everybody wants to complain about it. Everybody wants to find root problems, but nobody really wants to do anything. They want you to do it. And it's time that we start looking at, I was a high school teacher and we had hungry kids, so we started feeding kids. That's where it started. And from that, we have moved on. We have trained people to facilitate small groups. We have done some of these things that we've talked about. And I agree with Robin and the others. They are all wonderful ideas. We are lacking a lot right now in aftercare. We have found that when we get people free from drug use, they start feeling really good, their self-confidence comes up and they think, wow, you know, I'm ready to change the world. And then no one hires them. So what do? They go back to that vicious cycle and it starts all over again. That's a root. And we can change that. One Voice is ready to start that today. And Wyoming County is a designated county for this funding, and it's not released. And we're ready to go. We can hire 10 people on the spot, and that's just 10 people.
What funding are you talking about?
You want to speak to that?
The governor announced, well, first of all, the legislature established the Office of Drug Control Policy for the state of West Virginia, and the governor had announced that, you know, we cannot address this over the entire 55 counties because of the emphasis on how much money is actually available. So he basically chose 2 counties, Wyoming County being one, Berkeley County being the other. And at this point, there have been 3 different directors at that position, 2 full-time, 1 interim. And there is currently not a director. There's another interim director there at the Office of Drug Control Policy. One of the things that's available is Wyoming County has worked on a comprehensive plan. The plan is done. It's been sent to the office, and one of the major factors they've said is the funding needs to be released to address these issues. They've addressed everything from prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery. And so one of the things that we've asked the administration is that, hey, if the money's there and the office is saying that nothing has been done, give us the funding and we'll move forward because it's ready to go.
Thank you. And maybe we can come back to that. Deborah, I have just a quick follow-up. You mentioned that in 2005, students, this is in Oceana, where your high school students, you noticed they were dying because they said they had nowhere to go and nowhere to talk to. Did they mention why? Was it just because there were no therapists in the area, or because it was taboo, both of that, or?
No, at that time, weed was prevalent, and that was basically the gateway drug. Everyone that I can go back to that are in their late 30s or 40s will tell you it started with weed. So in Oceana, dubbed Oceana by the media, it's a beautiful little town and it's full of beautiful people. But there was nothing there. We have a couple of fast food restaurants. We have.
Didn't the McDonald's just?
You know, the Hardee's just closed. There's not a whole lot to do. There's a park, you know, the kids can go there. But if you live on the other end of the county, there's nothing there. They can't walk there. Transportation's terrible. It just, it encompasses a lot of issues. We have the people to roll their sleeves up and say, okay, let's do this. We have that. Wyoming County has been chosen a pilot program because we've worked for years. Our SAD has won national awards. I mean, we've got the youth coming up with the leadership that, you know, Greg spoke about that is failing. We have that. We have the energy to propel that forward as we go.
But before the students just they couldn't talk to their parents, they were not therapists, that kind of thing. Okay. So again, the question is, we're trying to talk a little bit about how we got here. And I know that some of you might be thinking, well, we've heard all this, not all of it. I think I've learned something so far. We've talked about these problems, but I have a hard time moving forward without being able to get a good foundation for recognizing where we've been. You have to me, I think you have to understand the challenges before you can know how to tackle them. So moving on to our next panelist, we're talking about the root of this problem and how we got here.
The biggest change that I've seen in 30 years of working in this is starting about 20 years ago, when the kind of medication that was available just went through the roof. And that was the introduction of high-powered opiates. And I think those drugs have done more damage than they've done good. And I've seen the good they do. From people who are terminally ill and struggling with pain, it's such a blessing to have that pain relief. But it became commonplace for everyone aching pain to be prescribed these high-powered killer drugs. That's the single largest change, in my opinion. I think that's coupled with an increasing sense of powerlessness. And it's not just in the political arena, and we've seen that in the political arena, that people feel like they don't have any say and that our leaders are corrupt and that we're going in the wrong direction. But I think it's a sense of powerlessness in our own lives. We don't have any jobs. Our children are moving away. We're at risk of losing what health care we do have. And I think the combination has been just toxic for all of us, of those high-powered drugs and that sense of powerlessness in all aspects of our lives. And I think that's coupled with a sense, our newspapers, the media, our public leaders are full of anger and hatefulness, and we don't know who to trust. And all of that leads to those very available, very high-powered drugs. But there's one thing I want to say about how we address the roots of this problem, is first we have to acknowledge that drugs are a part of our daily life. It's who we are. It's on the TV every day. How are we supposed to know which is a good drug and which is a bad drug? And if we trust the pharmaceutical companies to tell us about our diabetes medication, why can't we trust them to tell us about the sciatica that's keeping me awake all night? So we don't know who to trust. And I think that takes a community response of slowly building back trust in our neighbors, trust in our leaders, trust in ourselves. And part of that is recognizing that drugs are part of our culture, they're part of our lives, and not judging other people for the drugs they choose to take. We don't get to judge, we get to help. Thank you.
So I'm not quite sure where I'm going to go on this. I've heard some great ideas up here, and I agree with everything I've heard up here.
That's no fun. That's not a fun panel.
I can tell you I agree with everything I've said, because this is, when you look at this issue here, I'm in the law enforcement side. we deal with some pretty rough folks from Detroit and then Atlanta. And frankly, a lot of these folks come from out of state. I don't know exactly how we got in this mess. I'll say this, there's a lot of blame to go around. A lot of blame to go around. We deserve part of that blame. We want to look at others and say that the fault begins with them. But I look at our state, I look at these communities, I look at Athens out here. What a gorgeous place, right? We're in one of the most blessed places in the entire world, right here in West Virginia. Yet we look at ourselves as victims on a daily basis. I see it all the time. I have folks come during plea deals where we're sending them off to prison because they were selling heroin or methamphetamine or fentanyl or some of these other drugs of death. And they'll tell me I'm a good mom or I'm a good dad. And I say to them, you're supposed to be a good mom or a good dad. You don't get bonus points for that. We've got to get to the point here in society where we quit making excuses for our bad behavior. The solutions begin in rooms like this. Any of you that believe, and I'm appointed from the president, right? I'm a member of the administration. But I am here to tell you the solutions do not begin in Washington or Charleston. They begin on the streets of Athens. They begin on the streets all across West Virginia. This idea that we're victims to pharmaceutical companies, they did some bad things and they need to pay a heavy price. Or that we're victims to those drug dealers from Detroit. Give me a break. We've got to get serious about this in West Virginia. So I don't know exactly how we got into this mess, but I can tell you how we get out of this mess. We get out of it by relying on each other, by looking to a better model. She's exactly right. We've gotten to a point where every fix in society is the result of a pill. Want to lose some weight? Take a pill. Got a headache? Take a pill. Your leg hurts? Take a pill. This is not the way it's supposed to be, folks. We live in a blessed land. We can fix these challenges. The economy's bad. Anybody surprised by that? Is that an excuse for the drug addiction that swept through all of southern West Virginia in this country? I don't think so. We need to rise above those challenges. We need to meet the demands of society. Does it mean our taxes might have to go up because we got to provide for kids who are in CPS? Those numbers, let me give you the numbers here real quick in case you don't know them, and I think everybody in this room knows them. Kanawha County alone this year, CPS, number of children, 700, on pace for 700. This year, 6,600 across the state of West Virginia will go into CPS. That doesn't even include neglect and abuse cases. We're failing our children in terms of raising our children in the safety of communities that we ought to be focused on, right? Every kid ought to be able to wake up in the morning with a decent breakfast, go off to school, come home at night, be able to do their homework, and know they're going to bed with a pillow under their head and a blanket over them in the safety of a good home. Things like domestic violence, which we're not here to talk about. Listen, I'm in the law enforcement business, so we're locking up some pretty bad guys, like I said. But I spend a lot of time walking to places like treatment centers, where I see the great shining hope of citizens who started these treatment centers. Folks like Stacy Archer, whose son, Joshua, I think was his first name, at the age of 16 started using pills and couldn't sustain that pill addiction, so he went to heroin. And after a few years, and we all know that decline, that morning, those addicts every morning get up with the exhaustion of trying to get the next fix, which gets them through the day so they can go to sleep in the next morning, find that exhaustion of getting that next fix. It's painful for these folks. But Stacy Archer didn't say I'm a victim. She started Recovery Point with some other great heroes in places like Huntington, places like Bluefield. And she met this challenge by forming an addiction center, a treatment center. Domestic violence, and I'll hit on this just real quick because I know I'm running out of time. It's an insidious, terrible thing, domestic violence. The idea you're using drugs and you beat the crap out of your spouse, not acceptable. So when I went to a domestic violence shelter in Charleston and met with a young girl, well, she's not young compared to me, she's 32. But I sat there and talked with her, and when she came in 2 nights before, beaten and bloodied, every part of her body, from the tops of her feet to the lobes of her ears. And I heard them say, we can't get the prosecutor in this southern West Virginia county to move against this insidious force because they're afraid politically. I said, I'm not afraid politically. And it wasn't here, by the way. They do a great job here, and they're understaffed and overworked. But we went and we dealt with that. But listen, we've got a lot of big challenges. But we're going to solve these challenges because of folks in this room, folks at this table, all the great folks across this state. But we've got to quit looking at ourselves as victims and start becoming the solution. We're going to get there. I have great faith in West Virginia. But keep in mind, I'm not trying to be a good state. I want us to be the best state. And we've got to start solving this right here rather than looking for the reasons we are where we are.
Thank you. So my personal advice is that the root of this problem and the root of every problem that puts us on the top of every bad list and the bottom of every good list can be traced back to a sense of hopelessness. And I think when I don't know exactly how old you are when you develop a sense of hopelessness. I'm pretty sure it happens before you're in middle school. And I think when you think about these, and let me just, as an aside, I'm a pediatrician. So I think more in terms of prevention than I do treatment. And I'm very blessed with that because I can talk about prevention and I don't have to worry about treatment. So, but I think what happens if you're a 14-year-old girl and your family, the generation in front of you, a third of them are in prison and half of them are dead, what's going to make you care whether or not you become pregnant at 14? If you're a 15-year-old boy in that same situation, what's going to keep you from putting a needle in your arm? When I was a pup, I was taught by one of my med school teachers that ask every child you see what they want to be when they grow up. And he said it didn't matter what their answer was. You embrace it. If they say they want to ride on the back of a garbage truck and throw stuff up in that truck all day, you say, my goodness, that would be fun. He said the ones you worry about are the ones that don't answer you. And I can tell you, I've done this for over 30 years. And the number of kids that look back at me with just a blank look on their face when I ask them what they want to be when they grow up, it's 5 times as high as it was when I first started. We have a generation that has no plans to be an adult. And I think this is the root of the problem. I think if you give somebody a reason to live, then they're not going to fall into some of these traps. It's not 100%. It won't be 100%. But I think that's the solution. And it'll take 2 generations. And the other thing is, I will say this now, I'll say it later, there's no magic bullet. If there was a magic bullet, we wouldn't be sitting here today. And it's going to take a while to do this. And I agree with the young lady from Summers County that it takes us. And I want you just to think about this sometime during the day. If you went home and you found one child that you could tell your story to, by definition, you're all winners. Everyone sitting in this room is a winner. And you tell some child your story, how you got to where you are today. Because a lot of you are from these counties where this is such a problem. Let them hear your story. Encourage them. Go back and find them again 6 months from now and try to talk to them. You know, I don't know how many people's here. Let's say there's 100. Then that's 100 children that we could have an influence on. Once again, it's not big numbers. It's not going to get on the front of the Gazette or anything like that, but it will make a difference. And I think that's what we need to do. Thank you.
All right, so like I said before, my business is treatment. I'm not really in the prevention side, I'm not in the political side. And full disclosure, I'm not from Appalachia. Gotta make that clear. So, I love it here, I'm raising a daughter here, it's a wonderful place. In treatment, there's a specific culture, and that culture has shifted probably in the past 10 years. Historically, treatment across the nation, I'm not sure that this is specific to Appalachia, treatment kind of endorsed the shame-based approach. People are addicts because they're bad people. This is the historical approach, not my approach, to be clear. So treatment would treat a person who suffers from a substance use disorder as if they were a bad person. You could kind of smack the addiction out of them, break them down to build them back up. Have you guys heard about treatment approaches like that, like a therapeutic community where you have encounter groups with people and you break them down? The shame-based approach really resulted in a lot of people dying, to be honest. So if you go to treatment for 30 days and you haven't used any opioid and you come home and you were in treatment that wasn't really an evidence-based treatment and you use, which you're susceptible to anyway, you're gonna overdose. It's a biological reality. So people have started to notice that that approach really isn't effective. And there is a national model for the levels of care for treatment, from prevention all the way up to intensive medically monitored residential treatment. Historically, Appalachian treatment facilities really didn't pay too much attention to that, but there has been a shift, and they are starting to pay attention to that now. So we have a lot of really great directors, staff, frontline people who are treating the adults who suffer from a substance use disorder, who endorse the American Society of Addiction Medicine's philosophy and apply those concepts to providing evidence-based treatment for these folks. And part of doing that takes the stigma away. So if we treat addiction like any other disease, any other brain disease, we kind of eliminate that concept that a person suffers from a substance use disorder because they're a bad person, and we treat the symptoms. So, like I said, I can't really speak to the culture of Appalachia, but I can speak to a shift in the culture of treatment in Appalachia. And we really are moving forward with that. So to answer the question of where do we go from here, we continue to bring in smart people who are dedicated to treating this. We provide them with the training and tools that they need and the funding to provide people evidence-based treatment, including medication-assisted treatment.
When I think about the roots of the issues we face, there's a story from the Gospel of John that I think about where there's a man who is lame and sick who sits on a mat by the pools of Bethsaida. And there was a belief that when the waters were stirred up, that whoever was placed in those waters first would be healed. And Jesus comes across this man sitting on his mat and asks him, "Do you want to be made well?" It's a simple yes or no question, and his response is neither yes nor no, but I have no one to carry me there. And I think that's kind of where we are, that when we think about this question, do we want to be made well, there's a lot of deep-seated reasons why we think about it in terms of who is going to carry us and put us in what will save us. I think that having a truthful accounting of the history of our state is not an excuse, but an explanation of why we can't give a straightforward yes or no answer to that question. I think part of it is our state has existed as a colony of the United States, that a lot of our natural resources, our wealth, our people have been exploited. That wealth has been siphoned off to other parts of the country, whether that's timber, whether that's coal. And I think when it comes to prescription medications, I'm sure those who did the marketing saw potential money to be made here, where once again, wealth could be siphoned off from our state to go somewhere else. I think with that, we as a people share a lot in common with other colonized places around the world, but we perhaps don't want to see ourselves in that way because it's too painful. I think part of the reasons we don't give straightforward yes or no answers is because we've internalized a lot of dehumanization of ourselves as rednecks, as white trash, and that our sickness will learn rather than foisted upon us. We've heard about powerlessness, helplessness. I think these are explanations of why we are where we are. I think the way forward involves imagination, which when it comes to the Bible is the primary means of moral discernment isn't reason, but the imagination. And to my mind, the primary fuel of imagination isn't data, although data can help, but story. Can we have a truthful story of where we have come as a state? And can we tell a truthful and hopeful story about where we can go from here? Not looking for somebody else to put us in those holes, but as Jesus says to that man, get up, pick up your mat, and walk.
I feel like all of the wonderful insights have already been said, so I just want to kind of agree with a couple of specific panelists, and most specifically Dr. Rhodes. I think what we see, with kids every day, Child Advocacy Center, is that sense of hopelessness, and I think it ultimately does go back to relationship. I think so many of our societal ills are all about where we are in community and in relationship with each other. And I think West Virginia historically has always been known as a place where community really thrived, and where families helped other families. Coal camps, you took care of other families' kids. There was a real sense of community. But I think over time, that has not only eroded in West Virginia, but it's eroded all across our country as we live more isolated in singular lives. So when you're dealing with something like chronic pain, and we know that 25 million Americans deal with chronic pain, who are you going to talk to? We also, as a society in West Virginia, it's in our culture to trust our doctors. And so if your doctor is saying, I really think you need this opioid, I don't, I'm not worried at all about you becoming addicted to this, we're a trusting group of folk. We want to trust our neighbors, we want to trust our doctors, we want to trust our law enforcement officers, and so we do what the doctor tells us to do. And it's a very slippery slope. But I think ultimately, when we think about pulling kids out of this crisis and giving them hope, it's all about relationship. It's all about one adult singling out one child or a group of kids and saying, hey, I see you there. I see you there. And being their mentor, being the person who's going to walk beside them. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and it was about a different community with different drug problems. And they've implemented a program where they have singled out first-time offenders, sort of up-and-coming drug dealers in their community, and they have felons who've come out of prison and gone through some serious training to come along and mentor them and say, I know where you've been. I was there too. I've been through the whole system. I'm out on the other side. I'm going to walk beside you, and I'm going to encourage you to do the things that you were never encouraged to do as a child. I'm going to try to help remove those roadblocks that you have no clue how to move out of your way, to get your driver's license, to get your GED. It's the little things. And I think when we realize that ultimately everything comes back to relationship, and who's going to take me to the waters, and how do we do this together? There's no way we can do this in a silo. It has to be all of us. And I think what we all know is that every great solution is a grassroots solution. And that's where we have to start.
Okay, now that we've gotten through the first hour and the first question with our panelists, I want to, it is 10:08, and we're going to take a break here in just a few minutes. If you'll bear with me here, I'd like to ask and open it up to the panelists with just one question before we go to break. And I hope you're writing your questions down, and I know we're not going to get to all of them. But I just want to open it up to the panelists with one question before we go to the break. And as you answer, try to keep it to 1 minute if you can when you answer. Not necessarily everybody has to answer. But I'd like to, the opioid epidemic has adversely affected our state in ways we can't even comprehend. Part of this unknown territory is how it will affect the generations of children displaced due to parental substance use disorder, incarceration, and death, as we just discussed. What first steps, just the initial first step? So we have a lot of pie in the sky. Wouldn't this be great if this just happened? these resources just appeared. But initially, the first steps that we need to take to get to those solutions, what can we do to collectively and meaningfully begin to plot a path into this unknown territory? And I'll just say, I think these discussions is the beginning of it, just to start. But I'll open it up to the panelists if anyone wants to answer that one. First steps, what do we do?
All right. I think that we really need to begin an assessment and screening of children at the middle, high school, even the elementary school levels, to begin to understand and help the children understand what's going on before the children are identified when they are taken and removed from their homes. At that point, they're identified. But being able to identify these children who are in homes of substance use disorder, being able to identify those children early, empowering those children through education, helping them to understand what's going on in their life, the role reversal, the behavior, the anger, the aggression, helping them to begin to understand this and having conversation around this with the children, perhaps in after-school programs, identifying through this screening assessment of the potential children, and being able to use these children maybe to go home and to work with their parents. Parents love their children. They love their children. And having these children to go home and say, I learned this or I learned that. I know it's children don't want to disclose and they don't want to talk about. Is that really the truth? If they know that they are in a safe place with other children who are experiencing the same things, will they talk? I think they will. And being able to identify these children and having a school supportive programs and helping educators to look out for signs of these children and being able to bring these children in early before their homes and their lives are chaotic from removal due to substance use disorder, and being able to empower these children to maybe go home and even help their parents.
So when you say screenings, would you suggest incorporating this into like medical screenings where we have our annual checkups?
I think so. I think at the pediatric level screening, at the emergency department level screening, I think at the educational level screening, I think we have to begin to identify these children.
Basically, any opportunity that children have to do when they register for school in middle school or high school, use that as an opportunity to maybe throw in a few additional questions that might help to identify it. And then follow up, I think I heard to provide mediation opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even at the prenatal level screening, and begin to work at the prenatal. In Down County, we have greater than 70% of our children being born substance exposed. We have to begin to screen these people and identify them, and have some sort of a standardized way to do this and to identify these children hopefully before their lives are totally disrupted.
Is there a long-term tracking? I know when I looked into this before, for babies that are, that suffer from neonatal abstinence syndrome, I think I'm saying that right. Are we tracking that now? Does anybody know that? So that we can see that we are, the long-term effects of.
Well, the longitudinal study is still.
The longitudinal study, we're specific to NAS and the symptomology and what we're looking at long-term as far as school performance and outcomes for those kids. It's still underway because we're really we're really at the beginning of that. But as far as the just crazy increase in the number of NAS babies just here in West Virginia, it's mind-blowing. Where we were in 1999, I think we had like 1.8 children, or we'll round to 2 children per 1,000 libraries in West Virginia had NAS.
Yeah, the problem's huge. I'm just wondering if we do this in middle school, do we know what we're looking for to help identify children who have NAS, or maybe who might not have NAS, but they live in a home that has substance abuse?
I think there's a lot of work to be done around that. I know there was discussion yesterday around, school teachers and school officials just really feeling at a loss for how you educate these kids, how you keep them in a classroom, how you meet their needs in an educational setting.
So maybe develop,
Primary prevention for those babies born with NAS.
primary prevention program. I'm writing these down, I'm trying to anyway. So we talked about how we begin to start to attack this, and we started with the assessment. Anybody else have anything specific to follow?
I just want to add one thing. This is not going to be popular up here, but we're supposed to have an open and honest discussion here, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think we begin by not legalizing any other substances which are addictive. And, I realize that 80% of the American people say, let's legalize pot. But I can tell you to a person, and there may be folks in here who disagree, but I've talked with lots of folks in the treatment industry that I go out and talk with. I've certainly talked with lots of folks from law enforcement. This has become a very powerful movement across the country in terms of legalizing marijuana. This is not the Woodstock marijuana that many of you think of. In 1969, in August of that year, when Woodstock was held, the marijuana that was being smoked had a THC content of between 0.5 and 2%. The marijuana that's being smoked today and being sold today on average in Colorado is in excess of 30%. We don't even have any national studies which show the impact, the psychotic impact, the abusive impact, the addictive impact of marijuana of anything over 16%. That's just a fact. But the pot lobby, very powerful, will tell you something different. And I'll finish with this one paragraph statement. I get letters all the time. It says, "Dear Mr. Stewart, this is just a note to say thank you for enforcing federal marijuana laws." And we do that. I was raised in Huntington, and my mother was a Hatfield from Mingo County. I love West Virginia. I now reside in Florida. I've lost my 2 and only children to addiction. Marijuana was their gateway drug and their relapse drug. Keep up the good fight, even if it's not the popular one. You appreciate it more than you know. God bless you, Karen Bailey. I get letters like this all the time. I know that this group will tell me that it's not a gateway. I can talk with lots of folks, lots of moms and dads that will tell me it is a gateway. I don't know scientifically that it's a gateway, but it's certainly the first beginning entry of drug abuse. And most of the folks we prosecute, I know not popular in this crowd perhaps, but most of the folks we run into almost to a T, 100%, those folks we prosecute for heroin, those folks who go into treatment centers, they started with pot.
Let's talk about that for just a minute. Medically, do we know the addictive effects of marijuana versus, should we compare?
Yes, we do know it's not addictive. Study after study after study has indicated that there is not an addictive quality as in opiates or heroin or the kinds of drugs we use. Now, I certainly agree. Mr. Stewart is right that when you ask an addict what was the first drug they used, they're going to tell you it was marijuana. But if you ask me, I'm a judge, or any of you, what the first drug you used was, it would be marijuana. It's the wrong question.
So if we look at,
just a minute, you can write it down, just write it down and we'll take those comments in just a minute.
So if you look at the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder, the physiological dependence is one of 11 criteria. So people say that you can't be physiologically dependent on marijuana, and I'm pretty sure that that's kind of the status, the agreed upon assumption about marijuana. So are people going into full-blown withdrawal or DTs because of marijuana? No. Is there a discontinuation syndrome? Absolutely. So from a treatment perspective, whenever we think about legality, I personally couldn't care less about legality. My concern is patterns of abuse. And the patterns of abuse are what we're treating. So if we go back to the woman who was speaking on the other end, the other panelist, about interventions used for the children. Now, I don't really work with children, but I fully support the hard work that people do with the kids, and I fully believe in interventions with the kids that would mitigate some of the ACEs that they've experienced in their lives. So I fully support an extension of treatment and an expansion of treatment for both children and the parents. And part of that, part of identification and treatment is reducing the stigma. So much of our secrets are secrets because of shame. So if the community at large is accepting of the things that we're shameful of, that's going to open a lot of doors.
So I think I've written down quite a few solutions so far. It is 10:19, so I think this is a good time to break. I've heard a few of you rustling around out there, which is fine. But be sure to write down your questions and your comments, and don't forget to sign in. Make sure, I think the sign-in table's at the door. I'd also like to take this opportunity to point out and welcome. I mentioned before, sometimes the most important thing is to show up. Thank you for showing up. I also want to point out and welcome Bluefield State College, that is also online and watching. So our colleagues at Bluefield State, welcome and thank you. Okay, 20-minute break. Let's go ahead and make it 15 since we're running a little over. So be back here at 10:35.
Just to hear from the families.
Pressure on the space.
Is Stacy Backer around? Thank you.
He just asked me if I'd write on board. I was like, oh,
And I appreciate what you did. I just wanted to thank
Okay, so I lied. We took 20 minutes. I'm almost ready. Just give me a couple more minutes. I think we're almost ready. We have lots and lots of questions that we're not probably likely to get to. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with these, a couple from the audience, and from now on, I'll ask a question and then open it up to the panelists. If you all remain quiet and nobody jumps in, which I doubt that'll happen, but if everybody remains quiet, then I might call on one of you, and it might just be the person that I can remember your name. We'll see. I don't know. I'm just kidding. Okay, this one, what's the average length of time that foster parents continue as foster parents? I thought that was interesting. There was a foster family that I spoke to from McDowell County, and they were foster parents for a while, but then when they adopted a child, that same child, they were no longer foster parents, so McDowell County at that time didn't have any foster parents because the foster family had adopted. So can someone speak to that? Yes.
It's my understanding, and I see lots of people with more knowledge than I am out here in the audience, that adopting a child does not preclude you from taking in additional foster children if you're able to accommodate those children.
Right,
So
yeah.
if I'm a parent and I birth 3 kids and have room for 3 more, and I'm a foster parent, and then I adopt 2, I can still foster that 1 additional child. So I don't think that's the.
The biggest reason I have homes closing is not because they adopted a kid and don't want anymore, it's because of how they've been treated by workers that place their kids in their home. They don't want to deal with this.
So you're saying we're losing foster families because they don't like the way they're treated by social workers? Okay.
And I'd like to add to that, they don't like how they're treated by the courts.
Being a bigger person there, let's be honest and truthful. Any comments or remarks about, David, I know that you were a foster parent and now you're adopting. What was your opinion?
I can't speak to like average length of stay, but just to echo, yeah, I mean, it is a tough role to have because, the kids come with, I like to say like pre-installed with a lot of different kind of software, if you catch my drift. And some of there's just a lot of baggage that they come with and that, they've been through a lot. And that in and of itself is really hard to deal with. And then to navigate the system and all the therapy and doctor's appointments and everything else and the kind of back and forth and all the different opinions that come from the courts, social workers, guardian ad litem, all that kind of stuff, just adds on top of the already difficult job of providing the best care you can for the kids themselves. We have 2 kids in placement with us, and yeah, for us, you can have a maximum of 6, but we're at 2 right now because that's what we feel we can handle. And we're in a pretty good and stable place, and it's just hard to imagine welcoming in more kids and having to add all that to our plate as well.
So as part of a solution to this kind of challenge, for universities that train and educate social workers, I wonder what part of the education involves how you treat foster parents or anything like that, and is, to be mindful of that. And Scott, maybe this is a question for you.
I don't think it's what they're overworked.
Okay.
So when they have questions, because a lot of times the foster parent has to get permission from the child worker before they can do certain activities. And when they try for 2 weeks and nobody calls them back, and then they have to call me and they're like, I'm sorry to call you. And then I spend 2 weeks trying to hunt down that. It's just.
So the shortage.
It's a shortage.
Okay. So there's a shortage of social workers, and so a solution. What's the possible solutions for that? And I think Perhaps you can speak to that, Dr. Ingram.
Well, I see Patty's hand
Or
up.
someone on
so-
the panel.
But really, the first point I want to make is, as social workers, we have a code of ethics that we need to abide by. And central to that code of ethics is to treat everyone with dignity and respect. So that should be happening regardless. But there is a huge shortage for DHHR workers. And from that, and if anybody's in this room in this situation, I'm not speaking bad, but we have individuals who do not have social work degrees who are providing these interventions. So we really have to be careful when we use the term social worker as opposed to a caseworker or other type of designation, because the standards and the education is very different. You know, in my ideal world, everybody would have a social work degree, come to Concord. But, you know, we have to deal with these realities, but be aware that whenever we're letting these individuals come into the home, they're coming into people's lives who are at their most vulnerable point. And they may not have the training or the ability to do that. I know the DHHR works to provide the training, but we already have systems across the state that can provide that training through a degree program. So
we have people who want to help, they're working to help, but perhaps recognizing the level of training might help. Just recognizing that as you move forward, or if you want to help, partnering with folks who might have the resources to help along with that as well. I'm throwing that out there. You can throw stones at me if you want.
So the only thing I want to talk about is resources. Resources are critical here. And I come from the law enforcement side, but let's throw that out. I can tell you CPS here in West Virginia alone, the numbers are 40 children to every one CPS worker. On a national average, it's 15 children to every CPS worker. And judges, not to speak for the judge here, she does a good job speaking for herself. The system's overwhelmed. The system's completely overwhelmed. Law enforcement is fatigued from the war on drugs. I know some of you don't like that term, but we're in a real war on drugs. But the entire system's overwhelmed with the secondary victims as well, whether that's children, domestic violence victims. The system's overwhelmed.
So show of hands, how many of you, sorry.
I wanted to add a statistic to that. A friend of mine is a tennis director in McDowell County. And according to her, 50%, nearly 50% of all students in the McDowell County school system are being cared for by someone other than their parents. So if there's not any foster care available in McDowell County, it's because they're already taking care of their own grandkids and nieces and nephews.
So show of hands, how many of you in here are students?
I just wanted to say one thing. I've been at CPS for 10.5 years. And, you know, we talk about training people, about how to treat people. We should not need to be trained on how to treat one another. We are asking people to watch our kids. We ought to be treating them with dignity and respect regardless. And the problem is, many times, social workers just won't call people back. And that's not right. You don't have to train people on how to be nice and kind to people. And I hail from the free state of McDowell County, and I'm proud of it. But we need to treat people with decency and respect, as Dr. Ingram has said.
Thank you. And if you do have questions and you'd like, or comments, and you'd like to come to the microphone, we do have it set up here. You're welcome to make your way there, just to make sure that everybody can hear you. Okay, show of hands. How many of you in here are students? Students? There's 1, 2 students in here, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay. How many are therapists? Law enforcement? CPS? medical, and educators. Right, so who are you?
Social workers.
Social workers? There's a lot, okay. Anyone else that we didn't mention that we should be thinking about in this conversation right now that's here? Advocates?
I took one.
Mhm.
Substance use disorder treatment providers. I see ya.
Okay, we have a few more questions.
Jessica, I'd like to.
Yes, thank you.
Address something from the other question. As a therapist, I can't speak for my fellow CPS, but I can certainly speak for my relationship with my fellow CPS, with my law enforcement. I can't stress enough how you truly need to start at that grassroots level of knowing our community. And that includes your foster parents. They are part of the solution. We have got to establish those linkages and keep them strong. I mean, I've got CPS on speed dial, and they got me on speed dial. What if they have a mental health crisis in the evening, after hours? You know, my foster parents has had me on speed dial. These families struggle with kids with chronic mental health issues. Kids that have been in the hospital, non-placeable 9 months, they're taking a risk, they're adopting them. You know, so I can't say the importance of knowing Pastor Mark's number down at Celebrate Recovery, knowing your contacts in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, knowing I got our medical examiner on speed dial. We've got parent advocates. The child advocacy model, generally a lot of these kids end up going through the centers, and not only can, and I'm sure Shadow can speak to this also as the director in Mercer County, not only can we provide those services of mental health, but we also have the family advocacy services, and we have those relationships with prosecuting attorneys and law enforcement. It's really most of the counties have the family resource networks now, bringing all these organizations together for the common good. So, you gotta start at the bottom.
I would like to add to that if I could. There's a real push to train foster parents through the PRIDE program. There's a collaborative between DHHR and Concord University. We're training foster parents in terms of the issues and things to look out for with these kids coming in, you know, what's in their invisible suitcase, if you will, what they're bringing and they don't leave at the threshold of your doors when they come in. You know, I think that's real important training, allowing these foster parents to know and have some idea of what's expected, what's going to happen, and also the trauma training. That is now required as foster parents. And once you get those trainings as foster parents, once they get those trainings, and then they maintain their certification through additional in-service training, I think it's, as long as they have their certification, foster care is they can provide, as long as they have a safe physical environment for the children and the ability to provide the space for the children. But, you know, that's a great program that Concord is partnering with DHHR to train these foster parents. And hopefully one day we'll see the school teachers and educators at the table of PRIDE as well, understanding the different behaviors of children who are coming into care.
Jessica. Many kinship family members don't have that training either in terms of what to really do.
So when you say kinship, with a family,
That's not true.
They have feedback.
Okay.
Being
honest.
It's required for all certified homes, which
Yeah,
include certified kinship
but
homes.
most grandparents who are taking care of their kids do not come through DHHR.
They don't.
Well, that's valid. All the ones that do come through the DHR are
I know
required to
that.
have
I know
it.
that.
Just to let you know.
Okay. I just want to speak as a foster parent. My husband and I, we've done foster care when we lived in North Carolina. And when we came to West Virginia, we went through the PRIDE training, the trauma training, the in-services. Just out of experience, right now, we do not have any children in our home, okay? One, it is because of our treatment, how we were treated by CPS. And I love the conversation I had with the ladies over there. They really helped me out by CPS. We don't get phone calls back. You have to go through your agency. We went through Burlington. I can get in touch with my worker there. But when it's something that's important, you don't get phone calls back. Simple things like he needs a haircut and I have to get permission to cut his hair. Or we want to go out of town to take the kids to King's Dominion or to Carowinds. And I understand that. I'm not saying that they don't need to do that, but it's these extras. And you take them to the doctor's appointments and you take them to the therapist and you have all this time. And then to get to the courts, you're not a part of the MDTs. I've had children that were in my home for 2 years, 2 months, who just went back home to their mother. I've been to one MDT with that family. So we're not incorporated into this whole process. So we don't know what's going on. We're told and we're given the hope that we went in to adopt, personal note, because I can't have any more children. So we went in to adopt and we're getting that hope that, oh yeah, we're gonna terminate or we're gonna adopt, and then it's snatched from under us. We don't really hear from the guardian items. So it's like foster parents are leaving the system because we're not included into the entire process. Now, if you include us into the process, then we know what to expect. Then we're not getting our hopes up. And it's just like.
When you say MET, what, is that what you're saying?
MDT, is that?
What is that?
Okay, which, see, they know it.
I had no idea.
Which it happens so often, and the foster parents are supposed to be involved. One particular county, side note, I would not take a child out of this county ever again, because even with the other 2 children I've had, or the other children we've had, one, and we've been doing this for like 3 years here. So if you include the foster parents into the process like we're supposed to be, then guess what? We'll stay because we feel like you are supporting us and that we're in it with you, that we're fighting this battle with you instead of your caregivers, your babysitters. Only thing you have to do is make sure they have their 3 meals, some snacks, they have clean clothes, that we're in it together and we're kind of working together. And that's coming from a social worker with a social work degree. I just wanted to put that in there.
So is this part of the policy, if we're talking about solutions and change, is this part of policy that I'm not familiar with as far as the foster care system, that like, are foster parents supposed to be more involved and it's just not happening? Okay. And it's not happening, and we think that a part of that challenge is because of the shortage and the immense challenges. I mean, what's the solution to this? Is it a policy change? Is it training more social workers?
Communication, it's a huge breakdown in communication, not just with social workers and foster care, but between healthcare and education, between social workers and healthcare. It's like, we all know what we're supposed to be doing, but when we have that breakdown of communication and part of the people get invited to a meeting and the other part don't, then we never really come up with a solution. So the issue is that every entity is doing everything that they can, but we have to learn how to come together and work together, or we're not going to fix it.
So better communication could be facilitated by technology and electronics, but also just sheerly recognizing that you're all on the same team, as she mentioned, rowing in the same direction, just a recognition of that perhaps. I think that's one solution. Panelists, I want to turn it to you for just a minute before we take the next question or comment to see if you have anything to add at this time. And you're on a timer.
Okay, has the timer started?
I can reset it. I'll stop it.
All right. So again, I'm in the treatment realm, and one of the issues that we have is not having enough funding to hire on and adequately train people to do an incredibly difficult job. So we're saying we're meeting the need because we have the staff, we have the tools, we have the facilities, but we really don't have the training of the people to do it. That's a barrier for us, and in my experience with my work, it seems to also be a barrier for CPS, not having the money to adequately train and adequately staff to client ratio in a way that helps the children.
I do want to add to that as a potential solution. I have never worked with a CPS worker who doesn't care about those kids.
That's right.
And CPS takes a lot of crap, but like Judge Griffin said, it's a lot with the court system in and of itself. So what I would suggest, and I've told my team, is communication and honesty. I know my foster parents in Summers County because I take their phone calls, I listen to their concerns, and I've gone against the department whenever I've seen the best interest of a child being more with a foster parent than a biological parent. With that said, I've had to have extremely hard conversations with foster parents that say, hey, we are overworked, we are underpaid, we're doing the best we can do. We get frustrated just like anybody else. And I'll apologize whenever I'm that way. So everybody's gonna have a bad experience, but everybody needs to understand where we all come from. With that said, when you're open and honest and you say, look, in these CPS cases, it's about the best interest of the child. And our first and foremost by law is reunification of parents. People have to understand that because there's a bond between parents and children that nobody in this room will ever break regardless of what those circumstances are. So you have to make these folks understand, yes, that bond is always going to be there. Yes, we have hard decisions to make, but yes, we're going to make sure you're included in each and every one of those decisions because you should have input. It may not go your way, but somebody there's going to advocate.
And I think, Shiloh, did you want to say something?
Kristen was just so much more eloquent than I was going to be.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question at the microphone.
It wasn't a question. I'm a Child Protective Services supervisor, and I just wanted to let you all know, because we keep throwing out policy, we keep throwing out trainings. I think the DHHR does good training. We just were at a conference for supervisors and management at the DHHR who literally spoke on all of these things, telling us we need to return phone calls to our foster parents. We need to be more involved in the community. We need to be doing these things. So the fact of the matter is this is taught at the DHHR from supervisors level all the way down, but for whatever reason, there's a break in it. And honestly, I am a social worker and we are hiring people with art degrees, people with geography degrees, people with no experience with human beings. And so when you continue to have that, some of them end up being awesome because they're compassionate and they're people. And just like that lady back there from McDowell County said, they know how to treat human beings. But then you get the others and you get someone in the criminal justice field who sees it black and white, and it's never black and white in social work. And, you know, like, I feel the need to express this because we do all the time get negative feedback. But, you know, there are people out there who, like she said, we care about these children and we're doing the best we can. We are currently down 4 workers now come Friday. You know, that leaves me with like 6 staff members in Fayette County. These advertisements out here that I just learned about today, out here at the DHHR table, advertising $31,000 to nearly $60,000, that's false advertisement. My worker is never going to make more than $31,000 because the state is never going to think that we're important enough or needed enough to increase our salary. So everyone that goes and gets a master's degree, except for my crazy self, is going elsewhere because we don't get paid the money we deserve to take care of these kids.
So when you say going elsewhere, you mean like find another job or getting out of the state?
Becoming therapists who make more money or going to another state. My husband is all for leaving the state of West Virginia because there is nothing here for him and there is nowhere for us to move up and grow as a family. And that's sad because the more people that continue to leave, the worse we're going to continue to get because we don't have anybody here caring about the state of West Virginia.
Thank you for your passion and for caring. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I interject just, I was a part of that training and it was a very good training. And I think the DHHR is becoming more and more mindful of the importance of reflective supervision and employee support. So I hope some of the outcomes that we see from that training is better flow through. Also at Concord, you know, we've been asked to provide continuing education based off of that training. That's why I was fortunate enough to go to there, and we're committed to help provide that support. And when we're talking about support for these workers, I think it's really important to note that these workers deal with secondary trauma. They deal with individuals who are going through the worst time in their life, and they're deeply affected by that. It's mentally and emotionally draining, and it's hard work. So I think when we have this discussion about social workers who aren't returning calls or caseworkers who aren't returning calls, and the system's overwhelmed, our service providers are overwhelmed, the people who are working for these agencies are overwhelmed, and you know we do need more people. So everybody needs to get a social worker.
The one thing that I want to comment on, you mentioned, you know, the vacancies. We keep hearing a lot about the social work shortage, and we also hear a lot about how there are no jobs in West Virginia. So it kind of seems like that might be a solution to help raise awareness about the opportunities that there are within a social work job within the state of West Virginia. Maybe, I'm just throwing that out there. Yes.
I work for a community mental health agency and I supervise 3 residential substance use disorder programs. And I currently have wonderful staff for the most part. I see you back there, Laura. And one of the biggest barriers that I have in hiring is bringing people in who are probably super trainable and teachable, but we're putting them in a group of very sick people without the skills and experience to really manage that well. So they become overwhelmed, they become disenchanted, they become disillusioned, and then they leave. So we have this constant turnover because working with substance use disorders is so challenging. And it sounds like, just based on my experience with CPS workers in my community, that they have a similar problem. So it's really concerning for me as an employer and as a therapist to see that turnover because the impact is so great.
Okay, I think we can take another question. And I'll also say, I really appreciate the tension that's in the room right now. We said that we wanted an honest conversation, and even though these are difficult comments and it's difficult to hear some of this, I think it's necessary as we move forward to try and understand that we are all on the same team. We have the same goal of moving forward to help the children in this state, that we all want better for our communities and our children. So I hope that as the tension builds, or you feel that tension and passion and anger, just keep that in mind, that we've got to barrel through some hard things as we tackle these challenges. Next comment or question. Thank you, sir.
Yes, this is just a quick question. It's what is the average number of foster care moves per foster care child?
Statistic?
I think that would be hard to track.
I can tell you some of the high numbers, I hope it's not average. When I was working with the foster care system before I became a judge, I had children. I had a little girl standing in the courthouse, looking out the window, this little girl standing with one of my clients. And she said, "I just want to be a normal kid. I don't want to be a court kid." And she had moved, she was facing her 30th move. 30 moves for a variety of reasons, some of them her own, some of them systemic, some of them policy, all kinds of reasons. This child had moved 30 times.
But to get your information, you can actually the DHHR
And they collect that information through providers. Because I know, speaking for NECO, we have to collect all that different stuff. And so, and then we have to submit it to her in a report.
So is it available online or?
That, I don't know.
So we know that they move a lot though.
It may be.
I think it is at DHHR, the DHHR website can tell you, there's a lot of ways to drill down through the data at that, on that website.
But the information is there.
Okay.
So possible solutions for, I mean, any ideas for a solution as far as how to tackle foster families and foster children moving a lot? She has a comment.
Okay, so I've worked on both sides. I was a CPS worker for a few years, and I was also worked for a foster care agency, a treatment foster care agency. And the biggest issue that I saw was that these parents were not trained for specific behaviors. These children are genetically, they're physically set at a disadvantage because of whether their parents were substance abusers or how many ever adverse childhood experiences that they faced, they're already at a disadvantage because of that. And even though we have these foster care, these specialized treatment foster care facilities like Presley Ridge and Burlington, they are not trained on how to specifically address specific behaviors for kids.
And when you say specific behaviors for kids, you mean, so this child has a specific need.
Right.
And so when you get a foster child.
And a lot of kids in the foster system have these behaviors. A lot of them do. I would say the majority of them do. And instead of training that foster parent and teaching them how to address these behaviors, they move them to another foster home. And instead of training that parent and teaching them how to address these behaviors, they just move them to another foster home. So instead of actually addressing the issue, they just keep moving them and moving them and moving them. I am a school social worker now, and I have a 13-year-old child who has been in 52 foster homes. 52 foster homes at 13 years old. That is absolutely insane. That is mind-blowing. That is being moved more than 3 to 4 times a year. So no wonder this child has so many issues, because nobody has taught them how to address these issues.
Are we talking about medical, like physical?
No, as in mental behaviors. Yes, as in like mental health issues. A lot of these foster parents aren't being involved. Presley Ridge is where I worked, and it is a treatment foster care facility. What treatment means is that we take these children, who most of them are removed by the DHHR, and we put them in a foster home that's been trained in trauma. Whenever we had a foster family who had a child for 2.5 years she had 2 kids from Mingo County for 2.5 years. In 2.5 years, she was never once allowed to go in the courtroom. She was never once allowed to talk during or even go to an MDT meeting. She was never allowed to be a part of the plan for that child. And she's a treatment foster parent. She has been trained to be able to give input on this issue, and she was never given that opportunity. And the judge wouldn't even take her opinion into consideration. Mind you, she had had this child for 2.5 years, and the judge never once got her input on that child, not a single time. So it's issues like that these foster parents aren't. I understand that they are given these trainings. Some of them are given these trainings, but instead of addressing that issue with that child, they move them to another foster home.
Thank you. So I wonder how, you can applaud. I wonder how, so this is in addition to the basic training that foster parents have. The suggestion is to additional trainings specific to the children? Is
I
that
think
a
there
suggestion?
needs to be some type of mental health, like addition to the trainings, in
Okay.
order for them to address these behaviors.
Child-specific training, individualized mental health.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't know how realistic that might be as far as time, resources, and things like that, but the possible solution is there.
One of the huge,
Well, I also see my wife in line there, so I hope I'm not gonna say what you're gonna say, but, I would say with the specialized treatment, some of it is when our kids came to us, we were not given a full picture of what was going on with them. That would have been really helpful. I should not have had to learn in a hallway conversation from a resource provider their past over a year into having them. Would have been nice to know up front. As far as like specific things we could do, I know for us, two things. Children's Home Society, we go through them, has been incredibly helpful. And also therapy through Southern Highlands here in Princeton. We do the parent-child interaction therapy, has been incredibly helpful. But we have the advantage of having flexible work schedules. And I cannot imagine doing this if that were not the case. So I think expanding the availability of therapy for evenings and weekends for people who do not have that kind of flexibility is crucial.
I think it's gonna also be crucial that the foster parents begin, that's the biggest gap, and I don't know if it's a confidentiality within DHHR. The biggest gap I'm seeing with the children I serve and the foster parents is they know nothing of the behaviors the children are coming with. So,
Is
and
that-
what their therapy history was.
Is this a confidentiality thing?
No, I mean, the child can come to us in an emergency situation. I can remove this child 2 minutes ago. What am I supposed to know about this child? So these behaviors come out because of trauma. And let me tell you, I'm a foster parent through Presley Ridge. I was trained on trauma through Presley Ridge. I don't know why foster parents come into this. I don't know if it's they just don't think, oh, the child won't be that bad. It'll never reach that level of behavior. But the fact of the matter is, every single child that comes into care has trauma. Whether
But
it's
then-
being removed, the
Right.
drug abuse, every child has trauma. And no one is understanding that this behavior is coming from trauma. And until you reach out and get the resources that you need to deal with this behavior of the child for trauma, this child just continues to move and move and move and move. 2 days these people have had this child, and then they blame me because they didn't know about this behavior. I didn't know either, but you don't even give it a second to try and work it out. You just ask for them to be removed.
But when there's an opportunity for disclosure, you're saying.
Yes, if I know about this child's behavior, I can tell her.
So this
Everything
sounds, so it sounds like the hallway conversation perhaps, hopefully, was an isolated incident. I don't know.
That reality, I have a 7-year-old boy, 7. So my children, a foster care agency said he needs to go to a residential treatment center. 7 years old. Why are we putting babies in residential treatment centers? They have trauma. They may have been drug affected. And this is where their behaviors are coming from. So I just don't understand why people coming into foster care can't realize that, A, you're not doing this to get a baby. Right. You never come into foster care thinking, I'm going to adopt a child. That is not a reality. Reunification is always and will always be the #1 goal. And I just don't understand why people don't see that. I just can't make it any clearer. I'm a foster parent. I got attached to the first kids I had. Only had them for 4 weeks. It broke my heart to see them leave. I was never invited to the MDT, never invited to the court hearing. So I see it on both sides. But I don't know what the fix is because I can tell you that I got appropriate training in both sides. I got appropriate training becoming a foster parent. I got appropriate training becoming a DHHR worker. Maybe it's just because I have a social worker heart. I don't know. But until these people start learning that you don't come into this expecting a perfect child, and that you don't come into this expecting to work extremely hard, and it is hard, it is tough, but you have to be able to step up, speak for yourself, and get resources. Your Presley Ridge worker, your skilled Children's Home Society worker, your Burlington worker, that's your connection to the DHHR sometimes. If you can't get it done, that's your resource. We're talking about community working together. That's how you get things done.
And I'm good. Thank you for your passion and your honesty in admitting to a lot of things and also revealing several things as well. And Jessica. Yes, thank you.
I was just going to jump in here. Judge Griffith said, Shiloh, you need to say something. Pass her the mic. So I guess I'll say something, just on that note, when we talk about, getting a true history of what children have been through, every CPS worker I see in the room has sat at our CAC and, during a forensic interview where a child sits down with a trained interviewer who is basically there to make them feel comfortable enough to share whatever their story is, whatever they're willing to share that particular day. And we have had kids come through our center. We've had one set of siblings that has visited us every year for the past 3 years. Kira knows, Kira brings them. And it's always on a different allegation. You have kids who find the courage to tell you one little piece of their story, to see how you're going to react to that one little part of a much, much bigger picture of trauma. And your reaction and how you handle that little bit of information will guide them to know, I can never tell them about all the other stuff because look what they did with this little bit. Or, hey, wow, I found a safe person. I can begin to tell about the past 10 years of my life. And we may never hear all of their true trauma story within a certain amount of time or a certain setting, but we have to understand that disclosure is a process. It's not an event. A child's not going to sit down with you as a CPS worker, as a therapist, whatever your role is, and tell you about every incident of every traumatic situation, every abusive situation, every instance of witnessing violence, witnessing drug use. It's just not going to happen, and you have to be aware of that. The disclosure is a process. It's not a one-time event. Okay, anything else on that? Anyone else need? Is that on this topic, Rachel?
It is. It's,
I'm
okay,
sorry.
so David mentioned some other things that I was going to say, but another thing he didn't mention is that we were talking about, continuing education for the foster parents, once they go through the PRIDE training. And one of the things we go through Children's Home Society, and one of the services that they provide is once a month, at least the one in Princeton, once a month they have like a support group for the foster parents that go through them. And they usually have, we sit down, eat a meal, talk with each other about our experiences, but then they have a professional that comes in and teaches on a range of topics, navigating the school system and IEPs, which is a huge, issue with, our kids, because as you mentioned, yes, our children have trauma, and, our school's fix is medicate him. It's like, this is trauma that he needs therapy, so like being an advocate and in the school system. And also like sexual behavior, so they have a wide range of topics that they help our foster parents with. So I thought I'd provide a nice positive light there to something is going on, which is nice. So.
Thank you.
Okay,
I think we're ready for the next one.
earlier, before the break, we were talking a little bit about how screenings and assessments might help us identify children who are in harm's way. But it brought up a question to me, how are we going to make the children feel like they're not going to get in trouble with their parents if they disclose something to a school teacher or to a doctor?
So we talked about developing an assessment, a way to assess it. How do we develop that? Who's Weston?
I don't have the answer exactly to your question, but it presented the opportunity to talk about a program that I'm familiar with that I think could be enormously helpful for all these children. It was first developed, I think, in Massachusetts, and it's a cooperative program between law enforcement and the school system. And it's called Handle with Care, It's working in some counties in West Virginia, not all of them. We tried it here and we need to make it work. It didn't work the first time for a number of reasons, but what the program does is it asks law enforcement officers in their daily report, they have to report everything they do. We ask them to do one thing, and that is anytime they encounter a child, whether they're making an arrest at a home, whether they're responding to a domestic violence call, whether they're investigating a traffic accident. Doesn't matter, if they see a child, they don't have to know anything else. We want them to find out that child's age and that child's name. And then that gets reported to the school. This child had an encounter with law enforcement. We don't know what it's about. We don't know anything else, and that information gets relayed to that child's classroom teacher first thing in the morning. So they know that here's a child. All they need to know is this is a child who had an encounter with law enforcement. It may have been a good encounter, it may have been a bad encounter, but something happened in this child's life, because most of us, I see cops every day. I work at the courthouse. Most people don't. You don't encounter law enforcement, and it's usually kind of a big deal. You know, daddy may have been beating mommy up. Mommy may have been up all night doing pills and they didn't get any sleep. It allows the teacher to handle that child with care, to pay a little more of attention, to ask a different kind of question. And instead of saying, Johnny, put your head up. You can't lay down at the desk. She can say, Johnny, would you like to talk to me during recess about anything? So that's the kind of program that will help, that doesn't place any blame on the child.
And I'd like to address that too, briefly. So a typical day yesterday, I have an officer, because I deal with law enforcement every single day, hundreds of times a day. A law enforcement officer walks in and says, I have a juvenile petition I'd like to file for shoplifting. And I look at the information sheet, and she's 11 years old, and she stole from Dollar General, Nutella, bread, candy bars, and when she was caught, her response was, I'm starving. So of course, I tell the law enforcement officer, you can tell Dollar General, I'll come down and pay for the food if it's that big of a deal to them. Because what we're gonna do, and what people didn't realize is this child has been on our NDIT list as a family of concern for a long time. So instead of telling the law enforcement officer to press charges or to get CPS involved, why don't we do this approach? I get in touch with our branch CAC, and I tell our victims advocate and our family advocates, I want you to go into school tomorrow, and I want you to pack a goodie bag, and I want you to make sure that that child has food, and I want you to reach out to that child. And I want to see what she says about what's going on in her home. And then if we need to follow up, we go into the home and we make sure mom has food, because we all know mom's using drugs. We know that. But we gotta get this child comfortable enough with us to tell us what's going on at home, instead of acting out with those criminal behaviors. So again, common human interaction, doing the right thing by working together as a team.
So looking towards compassion rather than punishment, especially when it comes to children.
Correct.
And so I think to answer your question, handle with care is a possible solution as well when to develop that type of assessment.
Thank you.
I believe handle with care needs to be implemented for kids that are also in foster care and who may be involved with a CPS case that might be open. Because a lot of times, I mean, oh, sorry.
We do have more questions. I think we're moving along nicely. 11:34, we've covered a lot of ground. Good job, guys, for keeping it short. And go.
A lot of kids who are in public school, a lot of them are in foster care, or they're involved with a CPS case that may be in court, it may not be in court, that we don't know about. There's a lot of kids in my school of 700 that are in foster care that I had no idea whatsoever. And whenever they start to act out and behave badly at school, we want to blame that child, but we don't know what's going on at home. So I think that it would be very important for us to implement some type of handle with care to work with the public school systems whenever there is a child who is in foster care and exhibiting those behaviors, because law enforcement isn't involved with all those cases. They're not.
So expanding handle with care for a lot of other programs and
Yes,
seeing how it can
problem
be
with
applied.
that with privacy concerns.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but they don't have to disclose the full background. Just say, hey, this child is in foster care. That's all they need to tell us, because I know as a social worker that I'm going to have to work differently with that child in foster care than I would with any other child in that school. So I think that I understand that there is some confidentiality there, but I think that it would help tremendously with the school system. I'm not saying you're going to go around and tell everybody in the whole school system that this.
Telling one person is a violation of HIPAA.
So there are some challenges with that, but the model seems to be, I'm sorry,
Amen. He said handle all kids with care, and I completely agree with that. But it's really hard whenever you're in the school system and these kids have so many things going on, and we try to make sure that they're getting the education that they need. But if they're having all these behaviors in school, it's hard to get them to get that education that they need if we, don't have those right connections and we don't have the information we need.
I think she has another question.
One creative intervention that we started at Hidden Elementary is the principal approached us to do a group with the children who are in the top 10%. And what came out of that group after we had complete parent permission, they approached the parents and relationship, we're all back to relationship. Those kids thrived and their behaviors changed. And they got that little additional extra support they needed. And they've also put sensory centers, trauma sensory centers into each classroom at the elementary school. So if there's, instead of sending the kids to the principal's office or the timeout, they set up a sensory center and the kid can time themselves out if they're feeling overwhelmed and go meditate or find some type of sensory stimulation that will calm them down, or using no noodles. And we're all working together to lift those kids up so they're learning and they're feeling appreciated and they're feeling special, because what a gift to tell a kid, I believe you can handle whatever you need to handle yourself.
I would like to say that I think that we should educate the educators on trauma training. Not only foster parents, but the teachers that are with these children day in and day out. They don't know if they're in foster care, but the behaviors, a lot of the behaviors will indicate. But I really think that we need to look at a solution in terms of training, educating the educators in terms of trauma training.
The West Virginia Department of Education has developed a program for trauma-informed schools, and all teachers, all staff members are being trained and have been for the last couple of years. That's an ongoing process.
Well, I think
And I want to say really quickly that I also think that we've talked a lot about compassion for kids. I also want to just say a quick reminder and remind us that we all have the same goal and try to have compassion for each other as well as we move forward to try to find these solutions, instead of looking at another person and wondering why they don't know what has been happening for a really long time. I think we're all trying to figure that out today.
Well, I'm gonna piggyback on, is it Robin? In terms of trauma-informed care related to educating our educators, and it's not pointing a finger. I'm a school board member. I was a social worker in the school system for 10 years. I've seen it, been in those homes. I still see it today. And they need to be educated in terms of the teachers, whether it be some form of policy that comes down the pipe. As you had mentioned, the Department of Education in West Virginia is pushing that movement for their educators, which I think is amazing.
There have been training sessions all over the state and all over the U.S.
Yeah, and
A year and a half to educate educators on trauma-informed schools.
but not every administrator
or not every school district, well, I'm speaking because I live in Ohio, sends their people to those trainings. Yet. And that's what I was wanting to
what can
mention about
provide hope,
policy.
right? That's what can provide hope.
Yes.
Because it's started.
Yes.
So we've talked about a solution, it started, 1.5 years is still fairly new.
Yeah.
But yet, so there's still hope that there's a program that might be able to help provide some solutions to this huge challenge.
And my question is, I know we've talked a lot about middle school, high school. What is there solutions to implement these same trainings, more dollars to birth to 3 and preschool? Because that is the level that we need to be on, working with those children to prepare for what's to come.
What's the question? I'm sorry. Did I miss it?
Is there a solution? What is everybody's idea on that solution to provide more dollars or supports to the birth to 3 people, preschool, for those children that are, because we keep on talking about middle school, high school, that I just wanted to hear from.
Okay. I think you mentioned part of the solution, though, funding and money. That's always.
Well, I just wanted to hear what everyone else had to say.
Yes, Greg Puckett.
A couple things I want to add on that. I think if you look, the way that we've been doing things in the communities over the last 20 years has shifted over from programmatic to more environmental-based strategies. And I think if you start looking at that and saying, well, how do you change not only the individual, but the way that the individual lives? And will that make that systemic change long-term? And I think we've seen it, that it actually does work when the environment actually changes around that individual. We can do all the education and the curriculum in that school for those 100 kids, but when they go back home to the environment they're in, it's not going to change that individual at all. In fact, most times, if you get the information, they're like, well, we'll check that off the list, and that's great, but that doesn't really fix things long-term. So I think if you look at the way that we need to get into the schools, certainly educating our teachers and our educators and all the law enforcement. I mean, there's great programs out there now where we're trying to do diversion to incarceration through the LEAD program. There's a lot of really great things that we're doing in terms of prevention, education, and diversion. I want to come at this a little different angle because I want to get back to where the root of the problem is, because we're talking about the factors that are a result of the opioid issues that we've seen and why we're here over the last 20 years. All the things we're describing today are because of a particular issue that has affected us over the last 20, 25 years. And so if we start looking at that back to the root problem and how you reduce the overall load of the pills on the street, how you work, trying to get, the treatment and the education back in, I think we're going to be much more successful. One of the things that we've been able to do, I want to get a show of hands. How many in here are under the age of 21? Raise your hand. Exactly. How many of you are under the age of 25? 30. Now let's go the other way. How many are 50 or above? At this point, we don't have a workforce coming in, we've got a workforce going out. So we need to look and see how we're going to focus on both of those issues as well. And if everything I've seen and come back and looking at that, we've got to start doing additional education and resources by educating our young people to be the advocates, to be the ones in the room that are saying, I'm willing to stay in my home, I'm willing to stay in my community because I want to make that difference. I've seen this happen in places like Wyoming County. I've seen 700 students involved in the Students Against Destructive Decisions program say that I want to live in West Virginia. And yeah, your pay sucks. It does. You got to get better lobbyists. The teachers do a great job advocating and saying, hey, we want equal rights, we want equal pay, we're going to stand up for our rights. And guess what? They get it. But they leave at 3:30 in the afternoon. Trust me, I'm the son of an educator, and I know what new teachers feel, and I know what social workers have to shovel up. I get it. So we do need to get that equal. We do need to do that. But we need to get these young people where they're motivated to making that change happen in the first place. Teach them. We can guide them all we want, but they are going to lead this process forward. And I think, Mr. Rhodes said it best. He says, we're looking at this silver bullet. We're always looking for the silver bullet. We live in West Virginia. We need silver buckshot here, okay? We need to look at it from multifaceted strategies, get the communities involved. Every single sector needs to be there. And if you're not involved in a community coalition that's working on prevention efforts, then you need to be. Please come and join the effort. We'd love to have you.
So I think what I heard. So I think what I heard is empowering young people, educating children about and letting them lead, listening to children, involving them in the conversation. I mean, if we're talking about helping them.
Yes, and on one separate other factor while I still have mine, because I don't want to get windy, sorry, Jim. Everybody in here, if you're a social worker, raise your hand. How many of you see clients on a daily basis, either in your office or in your home, or in their home? I don't know if it's in your home, it's in their home. Everybody here should be trained on naloxone. Everybody should carry naloxone. Not only for them, but for you. Okay, it's no different than law enforcement. You need to make sure that if you've got an opioid antagonist there that's going to be able to bring you back or revive either your client or yourself, you need to make sure you have it. We're dealing with a public health crisis here that nobody's really addressed in terms of dealing with opioids as well. We've got the highest rate of hepatitis B and C in the country. I can tell you Mercer County's been under a state of emergency since 2013. There's 220 counties out of 3,069 that are at risk for an HIV outbreak, and there's 22 in the state of West Virginia. McDowell's number 2, Wyoming's number 7, Mercer's 147. I know my 3. But you got to be able to understand that there are certain statistics and things that are not only going to be able to protect that individual, but protect yourself as well. So you need to make sure you get that additional education. Because when we're out here working in the streets and doing the other things to work with these families, you need to know that there's protections involved for them and yourself as well. So I just want to say that, make sure that you've got the training and the education, and especially, I mean, 1 grain of fentanyl, 1 grain, 1 salt grain of that size can kill you. You need to make sure that you're protected for yourself.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. I appreciate that you brought it back to the issue at hand, which is the opioid epidemic. Obviously, sick adults create sick children, and you guys are leading the fight with that. I want to make it clear that effective treatment exists for substance use disorders, and people get better every day. Every day, people enter recovery, remain in recovery, they're hireable, they're teachable, and they're making our work and our community better. So while it's really easy for me to become hopeless and feel powerless with all of these sick children and people, we really are helping people get better every day.
And I'd just like to add a little bit to that, trying to reframe this to look at the positive. Being within the Child Advocacy Center movement for the past 12 plus years, when we think about providing hope to these kids, which is the title of this roundtable, where I have seen the most hope in working with kids who have felt hopeless and who were hopeless is through the multidisciplinary response. You have to have everybody at the table, or what your conversations, your solutions are only going to go so far. How many law enforcement officers do we have here today? We have prosecutors, but where's our patrol guys? Where's our detectives? They're not here.
It's a big panel. You can't fit everybody.
Not so much on the panel, but just in the room. So we've got to think about who's not at the table, who we need at the table. Does the multidisciplinary response fix every problem? No. Many of the folks I'm looking at here today are a part of that process, and we know it's not a final solution. It's not the solution that fixes every problem. But without working together, getting out of our silos, stop pointing fingers at each other, then there's no way we can move forward. But when it works right, it is amazing. And
I think we're here to learn, and I do hear a lot of chatter, which is good. I hope that you'll write some of those things down so that we can continue to learn and to grow from the things that you might want to add, that you can, you're welcome, to come up to the microphone. We have about 10 minutes left. And I do want to ask Mr. Rhodes if you can tell us more about the camp that you have as a possible solution.
Sorry. So we started a camp 2 years ago called Tomorrow Was Mine. And basically, the name of the camp is what the camp's all about. And I mentioned this earlier, that we have a significant number of young people in our state that really don't see it tomorrow. And so what we do is that we invite children from 8 counties down here. It's Boone, Lincoln, Logan, Mingo, Wyoming, Raleigh, Summers, and McDowell. And we have the camp, as it turns out, is on the West Virginia Tech campus. And it's for kids. The first year it was 10 to 12-year-old. This year it was 10 to 13-year-olds. And the whole purpose of the camp is to expose these children to what I call a parade of winners. Now, my definition of winner is very simple. If you grow up and you can support yourself and or your family, you're a winner. You don't have to be a lawyer, a dentist, a doctor, a school teacher, a social worker, whatever. If you can do that, you're a winner. And that sounds so simple-minded, but I'm telling you, you know this, I don't need to tell anyone. So many of these children have no winner. You know, their school teachers are their winners. And maybe if someone drags them to Sunday school, they'll see a winner. But a lot of them don't have winners that they get to look at. So we bring them over there, and what we do is that we get people from their communities to come and talk. And some of them are big time winners. One of my favorite people to come is Jamie Lester. Anybody know Jamie Lester? Somebody's here from Oceana. I heard him bragging about it a while ago. Jamie Lester is from Oceana. Jamie Lester is an internationally known artist. He designed the West Virginia border. He did the Don Knotts statue in Morgantown, the Jerry West statue, the Hot Rod Hundley statue, all the new statues out at the new Summit Center for the Boy Scouts. So he comes and he talks to these children about being raised in Wyoming County and wanting to be an artist. We have Kara Bowling, who was the past secretary of DHHR. She's from Mullins, another Wyoming County person. She come and talked about being raised in Mullins. Ron Stallings is a senator from Boone County. He's also a physician. He talks about being raised with one parent until he was 17-year-old, and that parent died. So we bring these people in to talk to these children. We also take these children places. We do field trips. Our big day this year, we went to Charleston. We went to the state capitol that morning. Then we went to the Clay Center, and then we stayed and watched the Appalachian Power baseball game. So we left Beckley at 8:30 that morning and got home at 11:30 that night. And it's an experience for these children to see other children like them. We had 36 campers this year. And what happens is that we have a wonderful group of counselors. And I'm not going to, we have one preacher up here, so I'm not going to wax biblical on you. But I can tell you, it's divine intervention to put our counselors together. We have 3 or 4 school teachers. This young lady was there this year to help us. We got 4 old men that help, and I'm one of them. But we have a group of people that truly care for these children. And by the end of the week, these children care about each other, and they feel like that they know each other. One of the things we were talking about trauma. Last year, there's a little boy there that I tried all week to get him not to sleep under his bed. And he come back this year, and I said something to his grandfather. I said, I can't get Jake to sleep in the bed. He said, Jake won't sleep in the bed. Jake he's hides under his bed because when his father died, he died in the house, and this little boy slept under the bed to keep from getting hurt. So these things are happening, and that's what these children are exposed to. So that's the mission of our camp. That's why we do the camp. I personally am very biased, but I believe it's the best thing that happens in West Virginia.
And how are they identified?
So they're identified, I have met with every superintendent in each of these counties. I start in the late fall, early winter, and I go to the superintendents and I tell them just what I just told you guys. And I ask, I said, do I have permission to try to get your students to come to our camp? And I've had a very good response from all of them. And then I say, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. And the county that works the best, and let me just tell you, I'm very biased toward Wyoming County. I love Wyoming County.
Me too.
Well, let me tell you something, let me just as an aside, I bet you $100, you go down, and you go to New York City, and you walk down the street and ask 20 people if they've ever heard of McDowell County, West Virginia, 16 of them say yes. You go to Charleston and ask 20 people, have they ever heard of Wyoming County, West Virginia? Is that state out there under Montana? People don't know anything about Wyoming County. And it's very sad, and that's why it's my adopted county. But the point is, I talked to the superintendents in Wyoming County, 2 women, and I said, I'll go talk to your counselors, I'll talk to your principals, I'll talk to anybody you want. No, work on the pickup. We know all the students in our county. And by golly, they do. Those women, those 2 women know every student. So we do it different ways. And we can't go to the school and say, we want the kids that are the most needy. That's what we want. But I don't want these kids to come to our camp and go home and wear a t-shirt that says tomorrow is mine, and everybody at school, oh yeah, that's one of the poor kids that got to go to that camp. So we basically say we want to recruit campers that would not have the ability to go to any other camp, is how we present it. And like I said, the superintendent's very, very helpful.
Thank you. And David, did you have something?
Yeah, just kind of ties into that as far as solutions. One of the things I would love to see, one of the other parts of my role is I work with college students in the campus ministry here. And I think our state universities and colleges have a great opportunity to reimagine what their degree programs do. I would love to see our universities and colleges become part of helping young people imagine a life in the state. That'll take some creative programming. There's an essay by Wendell Berry I highly recommend everybody read called Major in Homecoming. He talks about most degrees are really a major in upward mobility. And that a lot of what they teach students to do, not just here in West Virginia, but other places, is to despise where they're from and the life that their parents had and to want more and more and more. And in that, it's a commencement address that apparently didn't get a standing ovation, because he said what universities should be doing is teaching students to major in homecoming, which is to come back home and to make life good where they're from and to embrace where they're from and the life there. And I think all of our state schools have an opportunity to do a better job of that and to help students major in homecoming rather than seeing those schools as a stepping stone to another state.
And along those lines, I think we're going to have to wrap things up. We do have about 2 minutes, but I do want to open it just back up to the panel really quickly. If you had one sentence or one takeaway from it as far as a solution and moving forward that you had or that you have in solving this challenge for children, what would it be? And we'll start with you, Shannon.
More prolific trauma-informed treatment, care, everything.
Severance tax on natural gas to help fund some of this stuff.
Exposure to treatment for the parents of our children and the reduction of stigma across all ages.
I believe that small steps will work miracles, and please don't get discouraged. If you work for a year and don't see a big result, it'll come the next year.
Prevention, treatment, and law enforcement, the combination of all 3.
That we need to look at solutions that reduce harm first.
I agree.
And I wrote mine down earlier, but to begin to be as diligent in taking care of our children as we are in recognition, funding, and political gain.
four basic things: prevention, treatment, research, understanding that there is a lot of research that still needs to be done, a lot of education that needs to be done, reducing the overall stigma, providing hope. And I do agree, teaching homecoming is probably one of the best things that we could do.
Understanding the relationship between substance use disorder and child maltreatment is compelling and undeniable. The consequences are far-reaching, and the time is now to put children first and shift resources toward your children.
Plain and simple, don't stop fighting. You gotta keep working hard, you gotta keep, after it, you have to realize you can't save every child, but if you can save one, you'll make a difference.
Embrace these issues. Don't point fingers. Save one at a time.
You know, we talked about a lot of great ideas today, which I wholeheartedly support. But at the end of the day, it comes down to money. And we have got to pay for this. Money's not going to solve the problem, but money's going to help make a significant dent in it. And we've got to have money for prevention, research and treatment, and education, and even building relationships. And there are proposals. Natural gas severance tax is just one of them. There are other proposals that are easily workable. And I remain hopeful. I introduced one this year. It was defeated. But I told you that story at the beginning about what happens from one year to the next. And I'm hopeful that we can get that funding in place this year. Thank you.
So before you go, I'm going to wrap up with just a few more closing thoughts. I do want to take the time to thank the panelists. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Another round of applause. Thank you to West Virginians for Affordable Health Care. Thank you, Concord University. And thank you to all the panelists for their time and expertise. Thank you for joining us, Bluefield State. Thank you all, again, for showing up and attending today's event. Remember, and this is important, these are really big steps, okay? They're big next steps that we can take, and you have to believe that we can take them, and all of us can take part. Over the next week, the staff for West Virginians for Affordable Health Care will be typing up notes and drafting a brief on the recommendations that have been discussed during today's event. So again, if you still have comments or questions, write them down. They'll use it to inform policymakers, legislators, advocates, scholars, and all of those around the children's health table who can play a part in making meaningful change. So if you have something you'd like to contribute, you can contact Kelly Caseman. And she also has something to say.
There are forms in the back to join the campaign. Please join the email list. We're going to have 3 more roundtables around the state. The last one will be at the University of Charleston. And the plan is to come up with a policy platform that we will take to the state legislature next year. So we need you in the boat and rowing with us. So even if you just want to keep an eye on what we're doing, please join the email list.
She's the Director of Child Health and will be working on drafting the document, like she said. Feel free to share your thoughts, ideas, or contact information with her. And again, thanks again for coming, and I appreciate your time. Enjoy your time on Campus Beautiful.